Brett Nelson. I'm a professor at Conestoga College in the School of Workforce Development. I want to run a quick tutorial to let you get started with using a simulation package called Jaamsim. This is a discrete event simulation software program that lets you model processes. Um, in our case, or in my case with my classes, we're typically looking at industrial processes like manufacturing processes. But the same package can be used for service processes or service industry, banking, hospitals, coffee shops, um, anything really. The use of the software is really just limited only by your imagination. So what I'd like to cover in this tutorial, just the basics. Loading and running the program itself, just a quick walkthrough of the user interface. I'll show you the basic process elements that you need, the absolute minimum that you need to build a process, how to connect them, and introduce material into the process, and then adding basic process types. And then we'll, in another tutorial, talk about looking at a process, collecting information from it, the stuff that you need to populate one of these models, and then in a final process actually building a real model, making some adjustments, making it look pretty, and using it to troubleshoot a process or do process improvement. Okay. So the software I want to show you today is called Jaamsim with two A's, and you'll find it at Jaamsim.com. This is an open source program, so it's great for students or for anyone interested in learning this kind of technology, this idea of digital simulation, or formerly called discrete event simulation. It's free and open source, but this one's also very well supported. I've chosen Jaamsim because I find it to be pretty robust, very feature rich, and pretty friendly and easy to use. So go to the main page. There's a easy to find download button, a couple options to download either the 32 or 64-bit version or a universal package if you're using Linux or OS X. I can't advise you on which package you want to use. My computer is a little older, and the 64-bit version doesn't particularly like my particular installation of Java. I haven't been able to troubleshoot that effectively, so I stick with 32-bit version. This package does work best with an i5 or an i7, but I'm finding it works fairly well on my machine. So all I can advise is that you go ahead and try it with whatever you have, and hopefully it'll work for you. All right. One of the nice things about Jaamsim that makes it unique to me is that it's just an executable file. So you're going to get an exe file, and so it's quick to download. It's only about an 8 MB file, and that's it. And you click it and it runs. So you don't need administration rights to the computer you're using, which for me is really key for students in particular. If you're using a college or university asset, you don't necessarily have admin rights, and you can't do installation, you can't modify system files and the like. But Jaamsim doesn't need you to do that. So so appreciate that that we have this as an option. All right. Here's your basic models as it comes up in Jaamsim. Let me just move myself out of the way a moment. Here we go. And it might be sort of a familiar type of interface if you used other CAD programs. You have your modeling space. The default is showing a 3D space. Here, the model builder options, but we need to actually drag and drop objects into the model space. Down here is a panel where you input key fields, information about the entities that we're going to put in here, and then the output viewer. So when we're running the model, this is where we're going to get some information about the different process elements that we've created, what's happening, how long they've been running, what their uptime is, or maintenance times, and so on. The use of it's fairly intuitive. So you have something like the model title up here. I just double click on it, and change things to whatever you like. Okay. All right. For the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to suggest that we just stick in 2 dimensions rather than 3D. It's, a little less confusing to jump in just in a 2D model space, but certainly 3 dimensions is available, and you can drag and drop 3D objects, which is great, even more sort of visually impactful if you're running something to demonstrate. But for our purposes, let's just stick in 2D. And then I'm also going to click on the Show Axis button. I don't need to see the axis grid because we're in 2D, and I don't even need to see the grid because I'm not doing any kind of a real physical layout right now. You can bring in a CAD drawing, for example, as your background of your floor plan, for example, in a plant or whatever you're modeling, and then position your equipment or your process steps specifically where they belong within the model. So so the software is certainly very, very flexible that way. But for the purpose of this quick tutorial, I just want to show you the basic interface and building a very, very simple model to get us started. All right. The objects that we need are under this process flow option here. So at the side, just click the little plus button, and it opens up the process flow entities, as they're called in this system. And so let's just start. Every model is going to need some material to work on, or something. If this is an industrial application, or we're simulating a manufacturing process, then this is going to be a physical thing, whether it's a casting or a piece of wood or wiring harness or what have you, anything, a rim of a tire or a car that's been partially assembled. This can represent anything you want, okay? But it's a thing that's going to get passed around through the model. So that's a sim entity. Then you need something to actually, wrong one, sorry, not the entity launcher, an entity generator. So that an entity generator is the thing that creates this physical thing and introduces it into the model. So I think of this as like a supplier to the process. It could be like the paint shop that creates a painted part that sends it into the assembly department. Whatever introduces material into your system is this generator. All right. Then, because we're modeling a physical process, I like to show the movement of materials with a conveyor. And so I'm just left-clicking and dragging into my model space. And you notice I'm moving things around here, so I should just explain a little bit. You can hover on a sort of a movable point and hit the Control key and the left mouse button to move things around. So the Control key and the left mouse button lets me move things around inside my workspace. If I just hold the left mouse button, it moves everything. So even if I click on an item and it's activated, I'm just using the left mouse button and it moves the whole workspace around. But if I hit the Control key and move, it's moving the individual item. Or if I hover on a one of these points, I hit the control key and it adjusts that, clicks and drags that particular thing, right? So another thing, you can use the control key and the mouse wheel to zoom in and out as you see fit. So most of the activities are going to be left mouse and sometimes the control key with the left mouse. Okay, so we've got material being introduced into the system, physically transporting on a conveyor, and I like to typically then bring material into a queue. Oops. Like, it has to go somewhere, and rarely does material get introduced into a system that goes straight onto a machine. It will go into some sort of a queue on a shelving or in a Kanban storage location or something like that. So that's what this queue is for. And then we want these servers. So a server is the actual process step itself. This is the process that's going to work on whatever material it's given. So whether it's this could represent a milling machine, or a paint booth, or an assembler, or a quality inspector, something that's going to do something, take some time and work on the part. All right, when that process is done, it's going to move material along. So I'm going to drag in another conveyor. And it's going to typically, in a simple model, move it into some sort of a queue or storage location to the next process. Out of the process, I'm going to just keep it really simple and have this limited to just a two-step process. All right, and so now, maybe it's milling and drilling, and milling and drilling is done, and the material is going to move on to another department, whether it's assembly or painting or inspection or what have you. Okay, so the milled and drilled part now needs to exit our system. So the opposite of the entity generator is an entity sink, and that will take material out of the system. So that's it. Like, that to me is about as basic of a model as you can create to represent some sort of a manufacturing process. Now, this still isn't a working model. Right now, it's just a bunch of objects sort of dumped on a page or dumped into the workspace. There's no connections, there's no information about what they do or how they do it or how well they do it or how fast they do it. So we need to give Jaamsim a little bit of information before we can actually run our model. One of the things that we need to do is make a connection between these. It has to know, for example, this entity, where does it go? How does it flow through this? Although I've sort of visually created a nice value stream map, sort of horseshoe diagram here, Jaamsim doesn't know what I'm doing. It may think that this material starts here or enters here and exits, right? It has no idea. We don't want it guessing, so we have to give it a bit of information. So if we go back up here to this kind of middle or upper menu bar, I'm going to click on two things. One is this Show Entity Flow. So you can see now it turns a little bit blue. You might not be able to see that on a small screen, but so it's the little arrow up here, Show Entity Flow, and so that'll show me my flow path. Then Create Entity Links is the thing that I use to create the flow path. So I'm going to turn this on. Now when I come down, and I'm just using the left mouse button, click the sim entity, and you can see now I'm in this sort of connection mode or flow mode. So now it's saying, well, where does this entity go? it goes to the generator. And where does it go from here? So the generator is going to pass it along onto the conveyor, which is going to pass it to this queue. From the queue into the server, into the conveyor, the next queue, the next server, the next conveyor, and finally out to the sink. Now, it doesn't go any, like the sink, it's done, it exits the system, so there's no more connections to be made. So I'm going to come back up here and click off this connection mode, and so now I've just got my regular cursor back. I've still got these arrows turned on, see? So this is just a toggle of the visibility of these arrows. So with it turned on, I can see that my connections are there. And Jaamsim is smart enough to know now if I move something around, it knows that I've told it that regardless of where it is in my workspace, that's where the material is going to flow. Okay, so now we've got the flow path defined. So the next thing that we want to set here is the timing of the material flow through the system, because the defaults aren't going to work very well for us. So let's see. There's lots of flexibility. I'm only going to show you just some of the basic things that we want to change, just to come up with a simulation that we can run and watch. All right, so the generator. Now we're going to come down to this input editor. I want to show you this for a minute. And as you click on each object in your model, it shows you the input editor and the details of the information for that specific thing. So let's start with the entity generator. And you'll see down here the first arrival time. This is when you start your model at time 0, when does it deliver the first, or when does it make the first delivery? And the default is at 0 hours. And so I would like to change that to say, when I click go, wait 2 seconds and then deliver your first piece of material. Then the inter-arrival time is how much time after that does it deliver the next and the next and the next piece of material. Engine frame, casting, engine casting, bicycle wheel, skateboard truck, whatever. Okay. So in the next tutorial I'll show you, we'll map this into a real process, but for now I'm just going to choose really short times just so that we can see what's going on quickly. So the next thing here is entities per arrival, and the default is 1. So I'm okay with that right now. So basically, starting at 2 seconds, and every 30 seconds, the generator will deliver one thing into the queue. Okay. I'll go to the conveyor now. The travel time dictates how quickly material flows across the conveyor. And again, the default is 0. And this is why I want to change these before you run the model for the first time, because if everything's set to 0, I click run, it'll look like nothing's happening, because everything's happening instantaneously. So let's set some reasonable but short travel time of 2 seconds for the conveyor. In fact, while I'm at it, I'm going to go over to the next conveyor and do the same thing here, make it 2 seconds. Okay, now I'll come back to the server. The service time is, if you're into industrial engineering or lean or process mapping, we'd consider this to be cycle time, or the equivalent of cycle time. So how long does it take for this process to operate on whatever it's doing? So if this is the milling machine, is it a 6-minute operation, 10-minute operation, 30-second operation, whatever? So for purposes of my simulation, I want everything to happen really fast here, so just so it's easy to see. So I'm going to make it a 4-second process. The second server, maybe I'll slow this down and make this a 7-second process. Okay. And I've already got the conveyor set. Oh, travel time on the conveyor here. Oh, too short. 2 seconds. So all my conveyors are 2-second long. There's no times to set for the queues. It's concerned more like things like, is it a FIFO? If the default is true, you can say, no, it's last in, first out, rather than first in, first out. Or there's certain conditions, or only allow a certain number of, a maximum number of pieces or something like that to be in the queue before it can't hold anymore and it just won't take anymore. Okay. So that's it. That, I think, gets us a model that we can actually run now. The first time you click the run key up here, it's going to ask us if we want to save the model. So we have to give it a pn short tutorial, give it some kind of a name, and then it will start. So it waited 2 seconds, delivered a part, and then every 2 seconds after that, it's going to deliver another part. It goes into the, moves along the conveyor as I defined. Takes 2 seconds to do that. It sits in the queue until the server pulls from it. It does its job, which we said was really quick, 4 seconds, I think. 4 seconds. 2 seconds, material moves along the conveyor, sits in the next queue. This servers are a little slower. I've set this to take 7 seconds. And then when it's done, a 2-second transport time out to the customer or the entity sync to exit the model. So that's it. That's a simple version of a working model. There are a lot of things that we can do after this to make it prettier and more realistic, and I'll explore those in another tutorial. But for now, this gets us going. And part of this I just wanted to demonstrate. This really doesn't. It's not going to take a lot of effort to make a simple model. The software itself is quite user-friendly, simple to use, but extremely powerful and capable. There are so many other things that I haven't shown you, and I have no intention of showing you for the purposes of our course and for purposes of just getting started. But just know that there's once you get into this, there's lots and lots of ways of using this kind of a package to model very complex processes and to get a lot of insight into the process that you're modeling. So highly recommend it. Good packages, others that are available, of course. This one's a nice one to get started because it's open source and free, but you have lots of options. Okay, so I'm going to finish here, and with the switch back, you can see me. So I hope this was useful for you, and good luck in getting started. And in the next tutorial, we'll dive into actually mapping out a process, collecting the information you need from it, and then in a separate third tutorial, plug it all together and develop a nice working model inside of Jaamsim. Okay, thanks very much. I'll see you in the next video.